We were going to start with a vote here. Hardest class to play in D&D. And, well, that vote is still open, but I also promised that next we would explore. We've been working our way through the character classes, looking at some of the challenges, the things they do very well, looking at some areas that we need to keep in mind, because certainly being a role-playing game, there's no right or wrong way to play all the classes. But a cleric. A cleric is really, really interesting, and my vote for new players, cleric is one of the hardest character classes to manage. And I think this is because of an influx of people coming to role-playing games from a digital medium or an MMO medium, where essentially the cleric's a heal bot. You run around, you're doing the raid, you're in the dungeon, and the cleric, doesn't matter what else they do, just heal, 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 heal. And I've seen it many times on the tabletop. Certainly the cleric is a frontline healer. We have character classes where they're expected almost to heal on demand. Cleric, druid to some extent. Then there's kind of secondary classes that can heal, sometimes a decent healing ability, but that's really much, much secondary. An example is a monk class in some of the older versions of D&D, AD&D 3.x, and looking at the paladin on there. But the challenge in playing a cleric is if you're relied to heal, two things happen. You can't be everywhere at once. If it's a large encounter as a dungeon master, I'm going to look to try and split the party. I'm going to look to try and isolate the cleric, or at the beginning of the round, tactically try to really damage a player. I don't want to say pick on that player's character, but where can I do some serious damage? I don't have to kill the character, but do some serious damage to pull the cleric away. Get them. A cleric really wants to dominate the center. Tactically, D&D, if you're playing on a square map, cleric wants to dominate the center, because this way they can heal and they can move around. You get a cleric to one of the sides, you block them off a little bit, even if it's just with some minions. Now things are in trouble, especially if they're going to go help that character that got hurt. Moving around and healing, yes. But the challenge here, of course, also is that newer players take risks where they shouldn't. Just charging ahead, or rather than, if you're a fighter class, withdrawing a little bit and switching to secondary weapons or using thrown weapons, sitting there going toe-to-toe with the ogre on there. That presses the resources of the cleric more and more and more. But the cleric is so much more than healing. There are so many other spells. The cleric, I also think cleric secondary as kind of a mini bard. And a bard is a supporting class through songs, through spells, through buffs. The cleric has access to a lot of buffs. And even at the lower levels, where protection from evil, bless, okay, I get a +1 to my saving throw, or I get a +1 to hit. That's huge. That is huge. Anytime you can get a +1 in D&D, that's massive, and they stack. You get a +1 from the cleric, you get a +1 from your proficiency, you get the magic sword, that's a +1. You've got a skill focus in it, 2 ranks, that's a +2. It adds up tremendously. So think of the cleric also not only as healing, but also as a chance to buff the party. Third to that, a cleric's a tough fighter, especially after they've got a couple of levels on them. They've got a nice pool of hit dice where they can take some damage. Yes, they're not going to go toe-to-toe with a barbarian. Yes, they're not going to have the versatility of a fighter, but having the ability to, in most kits, wear full armor, heavy armor, plate armor, utilize a shield, deal with a weapon that deals D6 or D8 damage base, and having decent proficiency, a good set of feats if you're playing with that, and generally good to hit scores, a cleric can more than hold their own in battle. Once you augment this with some spells at the mid to high levels, like Blade Barrier and things like that, now the cleric just becomes a combat beast above and beyond. So freeing up the cleric, rather than running around and just healing everything, means they can't effectively be that almost front line or that second line character to fight. Then there's also the possibility, a little bit lower on the tier, but the ability to deal with undead. That, obviously, if you're going into a crypt and it's an undead adventure, but there are some very classic D&D monsters, mummies, mummy lords, vampires, things like that, where having the ability to turn undead or rebuke or influence, disrupt the narrative on there, that's tactically that makes things very interesting. From the DM, a cleric that knows how to turn undead and utilize that to effect, especially if I'm going to have some ghouls and skeletons and zombies, just essentially fodder to throw at the party, that makes my job as a DM much, much harder. So the cleric is much, much more. And that's really, I think that's, as a party, we want to free up through our own management so the cleric can take advantage of all the attributes. And that's not only versatility, but that's why the cleric gets my vote of being one of the hardest classes to play, because the expectation is heal on demand.